Madam President, today is February the 26th. 11 days ago, on Friday, February 15th, an angry man with a history of violence and a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber pistol opened fire on his co-workers and police officers at a warehouse in Aurora, Illinois, about 40 miles from the city of Chicago. In a matter of just a few minutes, 5 of this man's co-workers at the Henry Pratt Company were dead. He then shot and wounded 5 police officers who rushed to the scene. An hour and a half later, he died in an exchange of gunfire with other policemen. The day before this horrible incident marked the anniversary of 2 other mass shootings. The 1-year anniversary of the Parkland, Florida shooting that killed 17 high school students and staff, and the 11-year anniversary of a shooting of Northern Illinois University students that left 5 students dead and 17 injured. The gunman in the Henry Pratt warehouse massacre had just been told that day that he was going to be fired. His response was not just anger. His response was to pull out a firearm and murder 5 of his co-workers. I want you to meet the victims of this man's violence. This is Trevor Weiner. Trevor was 21 years old. He was on the dean's list at Northern Illinois University's Business College. He was on track to graduate this May. Why was he at the Henry Pratt warehouse on that day? Because he was on his first day of an internship at this business. He was so excited, Trevor was so excited about this opportunity to work at this business and to see what it was like to actually be in the real world, that he showed up for his internship 45 minutes earlier that morning, earlier than he should have. That excited. He died at the workplace that day. This is Clayton Parks. He was known as Clay to his family and friends. He was the human resources manager at Henry Pratt. He was also an alumnus of Northern Illinois University. He'd been working at this Henry Pratt company for 4 months, 32 years old. His wife, Abby, and his beautiful little 9-month-old baby boy, Axel. I met them at Northern Illinois University when we held a vigil for Trevor and Clay that afternoon. For the longest time, I talked to Clay's mom. She wanted to tell me his whole life story, hoping that she could preserve the memory of this wonderful young man and what he meant to her. Russell Byer is over here. I went to his memorial service. He'd been to Henry Pratt for more than 25 years. He operated molds and was the father of 2 grown children. He was also the chairman of the union at Henry Pratt. In a terrible twist of fate, Russell had helped the gunman get his job back when the company first fired him 2 months earlier. Last Thursday would have been Russell's 48th birthday. Instead of a birthday party, his family and friends gathered that day at his wake. I was struck as I went into the funeral home in Montgomery, Illinois. It turns out that the family decided that since Russell was such a passionate football fan, that everybody should wear NFL jerseys. The room was filled with members of his family, remembering him and paying a tribute to him by wearing jerseys of all the different teams that they supported. Russell was a Patriots fan. He wore a Patriots jersey in his casket on the day that would have been his 48th birthday. Vicente Juarez. He was a stockroom attendant and a forklift operator, and he'd been at Henry Pratt for 13 years, since the year 2006. Mr. Juarez and his wife of 38 years lived in a home in Oswego with their 3 grown children and 8 grandchildren, all under one roof. I won't forget that scene at his funeral home either, because the family had decided that everyone would wear a T-shirt. It was a black T-shirt with a color photograph of Vicente on the front of it, and one of his favorite sayings on the back. There they were, grandchildren, children, older folks, all wearing those black T-shirts in honor and memory of this man. I read his sister. His sister told me the story that Vicente was part of a family that immigrated to Illinois in 1972. There were 5 boys and 5 girls. They didn't have any money, and their father died 6 years after they immigrated. Yet they struggled and worked and stuck together as a family. That beautiful family had to shoulder this tragedy that this gunman walked into that warehouse and killed Vicente. Josh Pinkert is here, his photograph. He was the plant manager. He joined Henry Pratt's parent company 13 years ago at a facility in his native Alabama. He and his wife had moved to Illinois with their 3 little kids last spring. As he lay dying, Josh pulled out his cell phone and texted his wife. His message, "I love you. I've been shot at work." He died shortly thereafter. Josh Pinkert was 37 years old. How did the police respond to this mass shooting? Every on-duty member of the Aurora Police Department rushed to the scene, where they were joined quickly by off-duty members of the department. And then hundreds of other policemen, once the word got out that a policeman had been injured, firefighters and other first responders all came to the scene. I was on the phone with the Aurora Police Chief, Kristen Zeman, and let me say, Kristen put out a statement which I commended her for. It was the most eloquent statement. It said many things, but what it said I want to repeat. She said, every time an officer was hit, another went in. No one retreated. All told, 5 members of the Aurora Police Department were injured by gunfire. Officer Adam Miller, Officer Marco Gomez, Officer John Cebulski, Officer James Zager, and Officer Reynaldo Rivera. A 6th officer, Diego Avila, suffered a knee injury. They and the hundreds of other police officers and first responders who rushed to the scene are heroes. Simply put, heroes. Their quick, courageous response certainly saved other lives. Here's the cruel irony and the tragedy beyond the loss of life. The gunman should never have had a gun. In 1995, this gunman pleaded guilty in the state of Mississippi to charges that he had beaten a former girlfriend with a baseball bat and stabbed her with a knife. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He served 3. In January of 2014, 19 years later, he applied for an Illinois firearm owner's identification card. On that application, he lied. He said he had no felony record, and he was given permission under Illinois law to buy a firearm. He got away with that lie because the state of Mississippi had failed to submit his conviction record to the FBI's criminal background check system. He wasn't in the computers being disqualified. In March 2014, this man bought a handgun from a gun dealer in Aurora. 2 weeks later, he applied for a concealed carry permit. This time he slipped up. He voluntarily submitted his fingerprints in the hopes that his concealed carry permit would be expedited. Those fingerprints finally exposed his felony record in Mississippi and his violent past. The Illinois State Police got word of it, rejected his concealed carry application, revoked his firearm owner's identification card, and sent him a letter saying that he needed to surrender the Smith & Wesson firearm which he used to kill these 5 innocent people and to injure these policemen. Obviously, he never surrendered the weapon. It was that same weapon that he used to kill these innocent people and injure these policemen. Almost 7 years ago, a disturbed young man opened fire in a movie theater in a suburb of Denver, killing 12 people and injuring 70 others. The name of that suburb was Aurora, Colorado. In a sad commentary on how frequent mass shootings have become in this great nation, The police chief of Aurora, Colorado, tweeted after the killings in Aurora, Illinois, and I quote, "Months from now, as people talk about the mass shooting in Aurora, someone will ask, which Aurora mass shooting are you referring to?" Mass shootings have become too common in America. They make the news, but tens of thousands of Americans die every year from gun violence, and many of those deaths are barely reported or noted. They die in suicides and gun accidents, alone or in small groups, in domestic disturbances, in gang disputes, and in crossfire. I am honored to represent the city of Chicago, but my heart breaks to know that last year more than 2,700 people were injured or killed by gun violence in that great city. Face it, America is confronting an epidemic of gun violence. We need thoughts and prayers, but we need so much more. We need action to do something. Do the lives of these policemen mean anything? Of course they do. They mean a great deal to their families, and they mean a great deal to this nation. Do the lives of these victims who died mean anything? I met with the families of 4 of them. They're heartbroken, and their lives will never be the same. We need action to close the deadly gaps in America's gun background check system. Much of the work needs to take place at state level. State and local law enforcement agencies are investigating how this tragedy might have been prevented, how to prevent another violent felon from slipping through the cracks in the system. But we also have a responsibility here. It's not enough for a moment of silence. It's not enough for prayers to be offered. We need to do more to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them. This week, the House of Representatives will vote on a measure to close the gun show and internet loopholes in our background check system. These loopholes make a mockery of the law, which says we want to make sure that no dangerous person buys a firearm or keeps a firearm in America. It's critically important, and I support the House effort. But sadly, I have to predict that measure won't even come up for a debate, let alone a vote, in this Republican-controlled Senate. There's just no way that they will consider any gun safety measure. After Columbine and nearly every mass shooting and natural disaster since, a carpenter who lives in Illinois crafted wooden memorials to honor the fallen. His name is Greg Zanis, 68 years old. In 20 years, he's made and delivered, listen to this, more than 26,274 handmade wooden crosses, Stars of David, and crescent moons to communities across this country. Greg drove to Sandy Hook, Connecticut after 26 children, first graders, and educators were murdered in their grade school. He drove to Las Vegas after 58 people were killed at a music festival. He drove to the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, after 26 worshipers were killed. He drove to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to honor the 11 worshipers killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And even after all that tragedy, the mass murderer at Henry Pratt hit Greg Zanis especially hard. You see, Greg Zanis' hometown is Aurora, Illinois. Mr. Zanis told a reporter for the New York Times that he could drive away from all the other tragedies, but he said, "I'm not going to be able to get away from this one." To those who will say the aftermath of a mass shooting is not the time to talk about gun safety, I have one simple question. When is the right time to talk about gun safety? If we are only going to talk about it on the days when no one dies in America because of the use of guns, then of course we'll never talk about it. Will you wait until this killing comes to your community, your church, your kid's school? Is that what it will take before members of the Senate and people across this nation feel, as Greg Zanis does, that you just can't escape this carnage anymore? I pray that's not the case. We need to work together. Let's start. Let's do something sensible and bipartisan in the name of gun safety to make our background check system as effective as it can be. Look at those faces. 11 days ago, they were alive, part of a family, loved fathers, grandfathers, and now they're gone because one man who never should have owned a gun took it to work and in a fit of anger killed these 5 men. It's time for the Senate and this Congress to do something. Mr. President, I yield the floor.